Good day everyone, and welcome to the first part of a multi-part series that's based around Arma 3 mission building. This is going to be done using mods, but a lot of it will still apply to vanilla games. Before we start, things you should have is a mission idea, so a concept of who your players are going to play as, who the enemy are, and their main tasks. The other things you're going to want is a mod list. If you're part of a group, that'll probably already be built. And then you want to pick a map. If you are building a mod list from scratch, you need to make sure there's no warning errors when loading up the game, and there's no errors occurring once you're in the game. If these happen, most dedicated servers will then fail to run. With all that out of the way, let's now start on the very first thing in mission building. So today we're going to focus on building respawns for both players and vehicles, the different ways we can make those respawns, and then placing actual playable items. So, start off, respawns. Typically I use one of two major systems, this being under the Systems tab, Modules and Multiplayer, you'll have a respawn position. This will work as a selectable respawn position, and you'll be allowed to have multiple so that players can choose where they respawn. You can also select under the attributes so they don't get to choose a respawn, and it will just spawn them on the one position. The other option you have is using map markers. So you can place, for example, a start marker. You can go into the attributes of that, and you can change the variable name to respawn. That now will act as a respawn for multiplayer, but you will not be able to have multiple, or if you do, they'll spawn at random ones. And they will not be able to select which respawn they start at. So, diving a bit more into the module for respawn position, there's some options that we've got once we open up its variables. We've got a name, so what you want it to be called. The type of respawn, typically we'll leave this as infantry. The side, which typically you would want to set to blue for if you're going to set this for your players, or for whatever side your players are playing as. You want it to show to everyone. And then I usually just disable the notification, just so we don't have anything unimportant popping up. For the purpose of this, I'm going to name this spawn. So now we have a respawn marker, but there are some other things you need to do to get this and to get the map marker to work. We're going to go up to the top tab and we're going to go to attributes. Under multiplayer, you'll then find this. If you haven't got 3Den enhanced on, or I believe it's called just 3Den, then you might not have some of the options like respawn tickets and save loadout. That usually isn't a problem, and the only reason you might add respawn tickets is if you want to limit the amount of lives players will be able to use. Things we're worried about is the lobby tab and the enabled AI. We're going to deselect that. You then want to look at the respawn. As you can see here, the respawn is disabled, so we want it enabled. We want it on custom position. You can also have respawn on position of death, but I tend not to use that because it can allow players to just respawn right in the eyes of a machine gun position that has just killed them. So we're going to set it to respawn on custom position. Now that that's done, we can have the respawn counter showed or not, but players will now be able to respawn onto any respawn marker. If you want them to be able to select which respawn, we'll have to use the module, but under here we want to select respawn position. You also want to add a respawn delay, otherwise it will not work. And that's everything that we'll need to do under this section and with this. So now those two work. We will delete our map marker respawn and we'll stick with this one for now. What we're then going to do is we're going to test this. So we're going to put in an ammo bearer. This could be any playable item that is from the side that you've chosen here. Then we're simply going to click play in multiplayer. We're then going to load into the mission, and with our current settings it should give us an option of where to spawn. And it has. As you can see, we have our options, and we've only got one, so we're going to just spawn at the spawn marker. Click respawn. Now we're at where we've placed the respawn marker. Now the same is true if we had the map marker respawn that we had up here earlier, but if we had the attributes set and we deselected select respawn position, it would then just spawn them there automatically. Other things that we can do with the respawn positions is we can assign them to vehicles, therefore giving players a mobile respawn and a way to get straight back into the fight. This is quite simple to do. We'll just take a vehicle, we'll place an empty American Humvee. We will then place another respawn position. We're going to sync this to the vehicle. Make sure that these are set. And now we'll be able to select either our spawn position or to respawn in the Humvee. Now as you can see, we have two respawn options. We have the car, which is the Humvee, and we have spawn. If we select car and respawn, it'll automatically put us in the vehicle. This is great if you want players to keep the action moving, or if you're doing armoured vehicle ops where you want people to be able to redeploy with their vehicle if it needs repair, but without having to run miles to get back to it, or being susceptible to enemy fire. But what if we want a vehicle that the players can have at all times and we want it to continuously respawn? Well then, under the multiplayer tab, again, we want to take vehicle respawn, place that. Then want to open up its variables, and you'll see we've got a lot more options here. To keep it simple, I typically don't put in anything more than I need to. So position, this might be one you want to change to either starting position, where it was destroyed, a respawn marker, so on and so forth. I usually leave it as starting position. Position selection, we can leave as random. We can leave the rec as it is. I disable the notification, but you can leave that active. And then I leave forced respawn and respawn when disabled as disabled. Now, just because we've got this doesn't mean all vehicles respawn there. We have to actually sync this to the specific vehicles we want to respawn. Now that that's done, every time this vehicle is destroyed, it will now respawn back to its starting position. Now, we've spoken about respawn positions. The next step is to have actual playable entities. So, if we go to Objects, and we find whatever faction we want, I'm going to do this as British Armed Forces, and we're going to place down some people. You can use pre-built compositions, but I would prefer to place it bit by bit so I know I've got the right roles. This can be quite important because, as you might see, different roles have different markers. If you're using the DOI squad radar, that'll become quite handy for you to identify your key players. Now, if you're building a mission with a Zeus, you'll probably want to place the Zeus first to negate having them all as players. Cut that bit. So, building your player force is going to vary depending on what you want your players to be. For this, I'm going to build it around a pretty standard British Army rifle section. So we're going to start off with the leader. We're going to then have his grenadier. We're going to have a medic attached to him. And we're going to have a rifleman. That'll make up one half of my player force. I will then make a second unit as my second half. I'm going to have a team leader. We're going to have an auto rifleman, a regular rifleman, and a marksman. Now, you might notice something different. So the first one I placed down has this red circle around it. We want all of these to instead have pinkish purple circles. That indicates that they are playable, but they're not the forced natural choice for players. So if we open up the attributes by double clicking, we'll see under control we've got some options. We want to deselect player, but we want to select playable. Under role description, we can also enter stuff to sort of clarify what that role is. So for this, I'm going to put in squad leader, and then if you use @ and type in anything you want, on the multiplayer lobby screen, that'll then show them under a custom group name rather than the generic game generated one. I'm going to name these Alpha. We're going to do this the same for all of them, but unlike the unit leader or the group leader, we don't have to put @ whatever squad they're in. We just have to do that for the unit leader. Another thing you want to make sure is set for your players is special ACE settings if you're running ACE. For my unit specifically, we run ACE, and these will become very important depending on roles. So, for example, under the medic, I want to go down all the way to the bottom of their attributes to Object ACE Options, and I want to make sure that they're a regular medic. This means that everyone with none selected will be able to bandage, but will not be able to stitch wounds. Everyone with regular medic and a medkit will then be able to perform more advanced medical treatment. The same is said for engineer. If you have none selected, you will not be able to fix vehicles, but if you have engineer selected with a toolkit, then you'll be able to do full repairs on vehicles. So, we have our respawns done, we have a vehicle with its respawn, and we have some player entities. Now if we load up the multiplayer again, we now see that these are apparent. We've got at the top Alpha, and then below that we've got an example of one that is not modified. So these are generic in-game names with its generic group title. The final player entity you want to place will be the Zeus entity, the one for yourselves. We can either place that as an actual physical entity, like an officer, or we can place that as a virtual entity under the Systems and Logic Entities tab. Then under Virtual Entities, we'll want Zeus. I prefer, additionally, using the virtual entity does not work with these types of respawns. It does, however, work with the map marker respawn method. So for this, we're going to use a playable entity, an actual player. The next step, and this is same for either system, is to add a game master, which is found under Modules, Zeus, then Game Master. My preferred way of assigning who the Game Master is by opening up your chosen player's attributes. Make sure it's set to player, and set their variable name at the top as Zeus. You then open the Game Master module, and you'll have owner and name. I will put them to Zeus as well, and that will indicate that that specific player is the only Zeus. The other thing to keep in mind is that all add-ons, including unofficial ones, is selected. That way you'll have access to all your mods whilst in the Zeus interface. If you're running a virtual entity, you want forced interface to be ticked, or if you're running a player one like we are in this example, we want that unticked. So now you've got your players, yourself or Zeus, and some respawn and vehicle respawn positions. This is the first building blocks of actually making a playable mission for multiplayer. That's all we're going to cover today. In the next part we're going to go through building kits for your players and building an arsenal. I hope this was informative, and I hope to see you around for the next part. Thank you and goodbye.